Hello everybody, and welcome back to another EP video. My name is Ryan Guest, and in today's video, we are going to take a look at what a 2024 electoral college map would look like if every state split awarding its electoral votes in the same manner as Nebraska and Maine. That is, awarding 2 electoral votes to the winner of the statewide popular vote and 1 electoral vote to the winner of each of the state's congressional districts. Now, those 2 electoral votes represent the state's United States senators, while of course the electoral votes awarded per congressional district represent the state's House members. So with 100 U.S. senators, 2 per state, and 435 U.S. House members proportionally awarded to the states based on population, plus the District of Columbia's 3 electoral votes as awarded to it via the Constitution, there are 538 electoral votes up for grabs in any given presidential election. Some proponents of reforming the U.S. election system have floated this method as a fairer and more representative way to cast electoral votes for president without entirely abolishing the foundational concept behind the Electoral College. This method would likely increase voter turnout, as voters in deep blue or deep red states that currently award their electoral votes in a winner-take-all format would have more incentive to go to the ballot box and make their voices heard. Whether you are for or against electoral college reform, it is an undeniable fact that in our current system, the 6 million people in California who voted for Donald Trump have no real say, just as the 73,000 people who voted for Biden in Wyoming may feel their vote does not matter either. Now, if you don't follow election results very closely, you may not know that more people voted for Trump in California in 2020 than in any other state, and Biden still won the state by more than 5 million votes. That's just not fair representation of Republican-leaning voters in California. With that being said, though, it has also been noted in recent years that fewer and fewer congressional districts have been competitive in the last few election cycles. In the 2022 midterm elections, only 75 House races were decided by less than 10 percentage points. That's less than 20% of all districts. Meanwhile, just 40 races were decided by 5 percentage points or fewer. So most people would still be casting their vote for president in an area that skews strongly toward either party. That is a pretty compelling counter-argument against the effectiveness of this method when put into practice. Theoretically, the most representative method would be to award electoral votes in each state proportionally. So, for example, Biden would receive 63.5% of California's electoral votes, aligning with his vote share in 2020, which would be 35, while Trump would receive 34.3% of the electoral votes, totaling 19. I think that this way, voters would have more of a feel that every vote counts, no matter how strongly Democratic or Republican their state is. In this case, whether Biden wins 38 or 31 electoral votes in California could make a significant difference in the national race to 270. It'd provide more incentive for Republican candidates and the party at large to campaign and spend resources in California in an effort to squeeze out as much of the vote as they can, because they can actually win a certain amount of electoral votes based on how much of the vote they get. Likewise, Democratic candidates would do the same in places like Tennessee, Alabama, or Indiana, places that would otherwise go very strongly Republican, but where Democratic candidates can get a few electoral votes at least. That being said, of course, there's always a counter-argument, and in this case, it would be that candidates would only want to campaign in states with a large number of electoral votes, and largely disregard the smaller states. As you can tell, there are pros and cons to almost every option. Okay, let's get back on course here to the method this video is based on. Let's go through every single state and see how the consequential race to 270 would shake out if every state awarded all but 2 of its electoral votes by congressional district. We're going to be using the 2020 presidential election results for the statewide popular vote and its 2 electoral votes, but the 2022 U.S. House results for each congressional district. Now, I recognize that there is some deviation between how presidential candidates perform relative to House candidates. And there were several instances in 2020 where a presidential candidate received more of the vote in a congressional district, but the House candidate of the opposing party won the congressional race. But since people have already created maps using 2020 presidential congressional results, I am doing it this way as a means to differentiate a bit and see how it would play out this way. Starting in the Northwest, Washington, Biden, of course, carried the state in 2020 by 19%, and Democrats won 7 of the state's 10 congressional races. So Democrats would receive a total of 9 electoral votes from Washington to Republicans 3. Moving down the West Coast to Oregon, where Biden secured a victory in 2020 as well, with a comfortable lead of 16%, the Democrats managed to clinch 4 out of the 6 congressional seats in 2022, so they would receive a total of 6 electoral votes, while Republicans would get the remaining 2. In California, Biden carried the Golden State by 29 points, and Democrats won 40 congressional races in 2022 to Republicans 12. 11 House races in California were decided by less than 10 percentage points, the most of any state. As such, California's 54 electoral votes, the most of any state as well, will split 42 to 12 in favor of the Democratic Party. And going over to the 2 non-continental states, Alaska voted for Trump by 10% in 2020, but Mary Peltola, a Democrat, defeated Sarah Palin in Alaska's at-large congressional district, meaning Democrats would receive 1 of Alaska's electoral votes, the first time since 1973 that would happen under this system. In Hawaii, Biden won the presidential race, and Democrats swept the Aloha State's 2 House races, as all 4 electoral votes go in the Democratic column. So, with all of the Pacific states accounted for, Democrats lead the race to 270 by a margin of 62 to 19. For comparison, in our current electoral college system, Joe Biden received 78 electoral votes from these states to Donald Trump's 3. So you can already see how much this method does alter the electoral count. Parties that have long been shut out of receiving any electoral votes in states that lean strongly toward the opposing party, like California, are able to receive at least a few, and thereby increase their chances of reaching 270. Let's move eastward now, though, to Idaho. Trump won the 2020 presidential race, unsurprisingly, by 31 points, and Republican candidates won both of the state's House races. So the GOP gets all 4 electoral votes here. In Nevada, a battleground in recent years, Biden won the state by just 2.4% in 2020, and Democrats won 3 out of the 4 House contests. All 3 of their congressional victories in 2022 were decided by less than 6 percentage points. Regardless, though, Democrats take 5 of Nevada's 6 electoral votes. Another battleground in 2020, Arizona, Biden won it by just 0.3%, but Republicans won 6 of the state's 9 House races, which means that the GOP would actually receive 6 electoral votes from Arizona to Democrats' 5, despite Biden's victory in the state. Moving north to Utah, Trump carried the state in 2020 by 20.5%, and Republicans won each of the state's 4 House races in these midterms, so they will sweep all 6 electoral votes from the Beehive State, just as they will in each of the following states. Wyoming, Trump's largest margin of victory in 2020 of any state, 43 points. No surprise, Republicans also won the state's lone House race. Montana went to Trump by a much smaller, yet still comfortable 16-point margin, and Republicans won both House races in 2022, though the 1st District's race was decided by just 3.4 percentage points. In a more favorable environment for the Democratic Party, this district could potentially be a target for the DNC. Nevertheless, all 4 of Montana's electoral votes go to the GOP, as do the 3 electoral votes from North Dakota, where Trump won by 33 points, and in South Dakota, where the former Republican president carried the Mount Rushmore state by 26 points. Down in Nebraska, of course, this is one of the 2 states that already uses this method to distribute its electoral votes. In 2020, Trump received 4 out of the state's 5 electoral votes as Biden won Nebraska's 2nd Congressional District by a 6-point margin. The 2nd District did become a few points more favorable to Republicans via redistricting following the 2020 census, though, and now has a Cook Political Report partisan voter index of exactly even between the 2 parties. Republican incumbent Don Bacon held onto his seat in the 2nd District by 3 points in 2022. So while theoretically the results in this method would be based on the presidential vote in these districts, using the data we are using for the purposes of this video, Republicans will receive all 5 of Nebraska's electoral votes. Though I do think that it is fair to argue that had a presidential election taken place in this district in 2022, Biden likely would have overperformed the Democratic House candidate. I guess we'll see this November. Moving over to the West, Colorado was decided by 13.5 points in favor of Biden in 2020. Democrats will therefore receive the 2 statewide electoral votes, as well as 5 more, as the party won 5 of Colorado's 8 congressional races, giving Dems 7 of the 10 electoral votes in total, while Republicans received 3 from Colorado. Down in New Mexico, Biden won by 11 points here in 2020, and Democrats won all 3 House races, so they will sweep the state's 5 electoral votes. Trump won Kansas by 14.5 points, and Republicans comfortably won each of the state's 4 House races, to sweep all 6 as well. They will also sweep all of the electoral votes in Oklahoma, the 4th most Republican state in 2020. Oklahoma went to Trump by 33% in 2020, and not a single House race here was decided by less than 20% in favor of the GOP. So all 7 of Oklahoma's electoral votes are added to the Republicans' tally. Closing out the western states, if you want to call them that, we have Texas, which Trump carried by 5.5 points in 2020. So the GOP gets the 2 statewide electoral votes, which pale in comparison to the 38 electoral votes representing the Lone Star State's 38 congressional districts. Republicans won 25 of these House races in the 2022 midterms to Democrats' 13, giving the GOP a total of 27 electoral votes from Texas to Democrats' 13. Just 2 of the races across all 38 districts were decided by less than 10%. So under this system, the overwhelming majority of voters would actually be casting their ballots in jurisdictions that are less competitive than the statewide race. Alrighty, with these 19 states down, the Electoral College is actually perfectly tied at the moment at 97 votes each for Democrats and Republicans. Now, using the actual 2020 presidential election results with our current Electoral College system in place, Joe Biden received 111 electoral votes from the states that we covered here that he won in 2020. Washington, Oregon, California, Nevada, Arizona, Colorado, and New Mexico, while Trump received 83 electoral votes from the 12 states that he won here. So this congressional district-based split voting system is benefiting Republicans more so than Democrats, at least this far. Let's move on here, though, and maybe go a bit quicker through the states, first naming each of the states that Democrats and Republicans would sweep all of the electoral votes in. Starting with the blue states, Democrats would win all of the electoral votes using this system in the northeastern states of Vermont, 3 electoral votes, Connecticut, 7 electoral votes, Delaware, 3 electoral votes again, and Massachusetts, 11 electoral votes, as well as Rhode Island, 4 electoral votes, and then finally the District of Columbia, or Washington, D.C., 3 electoral votes. That raises the Democratic Party's grand total to 128. Biden won each of these states by more than 19 percentage points in 2020, and Democrats won every House race in these states as well. For Republicans, they'll receive all of the electoral votes in 3 states. Iowa, yes, Iowa. Trump only won the presidential race by 8 points in 2020, and it has been a competitive state for most of the last 2 decades, voting Democratic in 2012. But Republicans did win all of the 4 House races here in 2022, flipping the 3rd district, as 3 of the 4 districts were decided by less than 10%. Over in West Virginia, a bit of a different story here, as Trump won by almost 39% in 2020, and both House races were also decided by more than 30%. Finally, in the South, the only other Republican sweep is Arkansas, which Trump won by 28 points, and Republicans won every House race by at least 25%. Now, these 3 states only get Republicans up to 113 electoral votes so far. But of note here is that there are 6 states where Republicans would win all but one single electoral vote. Those include Louisiana, where Trump gets the 2 electoral votes for winning the state by 18.5 points, and Republicans won 5 of 6 House races. None of Louisiana's congressional districts are even remotely competitive, with the lone Democratic win coming by more than 55 points. It's a similar story over in Mississippi, where Trump won by 16.5 points, and Republicans won all but one district, with none of the races being competitive. Alabama is also similar. It backed Trump by 25 points in 2020, and Republicans won all but one solidly Democratic district. Not a single one of Alabama's 7 House races were decided by a margin of less than 28 percentage points. This theme extends to Tennessee, Kentucky, and South Carolina as well, where Trump won by 23, 25, and 12 points respectively. Yet again, there were no competitive races in any of these 3 states. Only Tennessee's 5th and South Carolina's 1st congressional districts were decided by less than 20%. Republicans would receive 10 out of 11 electoral votes in Tennessee, 7 out of 8 electoral votes in Kentucky, and 8 out of 9 in South Carolina. That leaves 17 states remaining, with 246 electoral votes up for grabs. From left to right, west to east, Missouri splits its 10 electoral votes 8-2. Trump won by 15 points statewide. In Minnesota, Biden won by 7 points, but the state's House delegation is split at 4-4, as Democrats and Republicans each won 4 House races in Minnesota in 2022, and therefore Democrats would only receive 6 electoral votes instead of the usual 10. The state of Wisconsin went for Biden by 0.6% of the statewide vote in 2020. It was the 3rd closest race in that election, and so Biden receives 2 electoral votes there. However, Wisconsin's congressional map is skewed heavily Republican. 6 of 8 districts have a partisan lean that favors the GOP, and Republican House candidates won all 6 of those districts, albeit the 3rd district, a Republican flip, was decided by just 2.8%. Regardless, despite Biden's victory, Republicans would win 6 out of the 10 electoral votes using this method. Down in Illinois, Biden won, of course, by 17 points. It's a solid blue state. And Democrats managed to win 14 out of 17 House districts, gaining 1, while Republicans lost a seat as the state of Illinois lost a district due to the census. 3 of Illinois' House contests were decided by single-digit margins, all 3 of which went blue. Overall, though, Democrats will receive 16 electoral votes to Republicans' 3. Alrighty, before we finish up the rest of the states, let's do another status update here, as Republicans now lead 179 to 162, with 197 votes still remaining. Comparatively, Joe Biden received 181 electoral votes from these states to Donald Trump's 160, using the 2020 Electoral College results. So while Democrats have lost 19 votes via this method, Republicans have gained 19. In Michigan, it lost an electoral vote following the census, just like Illinois, which means that it lost a congressional district. Biden won the statewide contest by almost 3% in 2020, while Democrats won 7 out of the 13 House races. The same as they did in 2020, while Republicans lost a seat, winning 6 seats this time around. With Michigan's 7-6 congressional delegation and Biden's victory, Democrats received 9 electoral votes to Republicans' 6. Down in Indiana, Trump won by 16%, and Republicans won 7 out of 9 House districts in 2022. The only race decided by less than 10% in Indiana was the state's first district. Over in Ohio, 10 of their 15 districts went Republican in 2022, while Trump won the state by 8 points in 2020. That means that 12 electoral votes go to the GOP from Ohio, while Democrats get 5. Finishing up the Northeast, starting in Pennsylvania, the Keystone State, a perennial battleground, Biden won it by 1.2% in 2020. And Democrats took 9 of 17 House districts, meaning that 11 electoral votes go to the Democratic Party from Pennsylvania, 8 go to Republicans. The Keystone State has a similar story to Michigan, where both states lost an electoral vote in the census, and Republicans ended up being on the losing end of both of those seats. Up here in the Empire State, obviously Biden won in 2020 by a margin of 23%. Meanwhile, though, Democrats actually lost 4 House seats in the 2022 midterms, the most in any state. It was a catastrophic result for the New York State Democratic Party. Democrats only won 15 congressional races to Republicans' 11, despite holding a ginormous advantage over the GOP in this deeply blue state. As a result, Democrats only get 17 electoral votes from New York using this method, to Republicans' 11, down from the 28 that Democrats would otherwise get by winning the statewide race. Over in New Hampshire, I actually forgot to include this race when I was discussing states that Democrats swept, because it is much more of a swing state than its counterparts, as Biden won it by 7% in 2020, and Democrats won both congressional races in 2022 by roughly 10-point margins each. All 4 electoral votes, as a result, from New Hampshire go blue. Up in Maine, the other state, along with Nebraska, that already uses this method, just like New Hampshire, I forgot to include it in Democratic sweeps, as in 2020, Biden won the statewide race and the 1st district, but Trump won the 2nd district by a pretty comfortable margin. However, in the 2022 House race for that 2nd district, the Democratic incumbent was reelected by 6 points. Now, this is kind of in the reverse effect of Nebraska's 2nd district. Chances are that any presidential election in the near future held in this 2nd district in Maine would probably go Republicans' way. So that does represent a bit of a flaw in this data being used for this. But as this is just a visualizer using 2022 House data exclusively, all 4 votes from Maine go Dems' way. Down the coast to New Jersey, Biden won by 16% statewide, while Democrats won 9 of 12 House seats. So 11 electoral votes go into the Democratic column from New Jersey, and just 3 go to Republicans, which puts Dems just 3 votes shy now of Republicans, though using the regular system, they would have had a 264 to 189 seat advantage. So the Republican edge via this system has actually increased, as Dems are now underperforming their 2020 results in the states we finished by 39 votes. They will pick up 9 more votes, though, in Maryland, as Biden won here by 33% in 2020, and the party was victorious in 7 out of 8 House races. And in Virginia, another blue state at the presidential level, Biden's margin of victory here was 10 points, and Democrats have a slight edge in the battle for the state's 11 House races, winning 6 to Republicans' 5 in 2022. That does mean the Democrats get 8 votes to Republicans' 5, increasing their grand total to 244, inching closer and closer to 270. They're now just 26 votes from that magic number, with 3 states remaining. And starting in North Carolina, Trump won by 1.4% in 2020. It was his lowest margin of victory of any of the states that he won. But Democrats actually gained 2 House seats in North Carolina as the state gained a district following the census, and a more favorable congressional map allowed them to gain 2 seats in newly drawn districts. 4 of North Carolina's 14 districts were decided by less than 10% in 2022. And overall, Republicans take 9 of the 16 electoral votes at stake, while Democrats receive 7. Penultimately, in the state of Georgia, where Biden made Democrats' breakthrough victory in 2020 by just 0.2%, a historically close margin that grants the party 2 statewide electoral votes, plus 5 more from the 2022 House races here, for a total of 7, while Republicans won 9 House seats and therefore receive 9 electoral votes. And as such, Georgia joins Wisconsin and Arizona as states that Biden won, yet where Democrats receive fewer electoral votes than Republicans via this system, as the GOP performed more strongly in the midterms congressional races here. That leaves just Florida and its 30 electoral votes up for grabs to decide which party would win the election here in this scenario. Trump won Florida by 3.4% in 2020, making it one of just 8 states where he performed better than in 2016. And that result was actually just the beginning of a hard swing to the right that we have seen since, most notably in the 2022 midterms when Republicans, Governor Ron DeSantis and Senator Marco Rubio, were reelected by 19 and 16 points respectively, and where Republicans managed to win 20 out of the 28 House races. That does mean that the GOP receives a total of 22 electoral votes in Florida, to the Democrats' 8, skyrocketing Republicans up to 274 electoral votes, enough to put them over the top, and defeat the Democratic Party, who received 264 electoral votes using this method. Let me know in the comments what you think about this potential reform of the Electoral College. Also, feel free to suggest any other videos I can make on this topic, or anything related to the world of elections. That does it though for today's video. Shout out to my channel members on screen here. Thank you so much for your support. If you would like to become a member, go ahead and click that join button below this video to receive exclusive perks. Make sure also to subscribe to my channel down below, and please leave a like on the video if you enjoyed it. Also be sure to check out electionpredictionsofficial.com for my 2024 presidential election forecast as well. You can check out more content from my channel here, and as always, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time. EP